the one thing that ignites the most fear within the most people. That one thing that sparks the visceral response to cling, to save the self from the sting, to fight for preservation at all costs, to protect from annihilation. That perception of imminent and complete loss. In this moment, we share the most profound conversation with a beautiful soul who is the epitome of resilience and perseverance, with the tenacity to love at all costs, understanding the reasons for it all, while embracing the gifts through the grand challenge of forgiveness. My friend, Lynda Colter-Bergh, shares with us her perspective of life as seen through the lens of her own journey, connecting with past lives and many near-death experiences. As well, she shares her personal experience as caregiver for a now transitioned spouse and her present role as Death Doula, or guide for those who choose to walk through the doors of death consciously. This is a powerhouse conversation that will demystify standard perception of death and ignite within a thirst for life, that grand self-discovery that is best achieved through exploration and childlike wonder. While death stands as one of the most debilitating fears, understanding the truth serves as divine master key to one's own self-liberation. So, in this moment, on the heels of a deep, intentional breath, drawing the awareness into the sacred space of the heart, settle, and with openness, receive, 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 receive.
Who am I? All right. Yeah. Lynda Colter-Bergh. And I have had a very diverse background. I grew up having abilities, was told by my mom, cut it out. People will think you're strange. So by the age of 5, when I started kindergarten, I lost my best friend who was a ghost because he said mom was right. And so I blamed mom, wouldn't talk to her for weeks because she made him go away, and set aside all of that and denied all of that until I couldn't anymore. One of the things that I have done through my work, because I denied it, and we'll go back, I guess, at the beginning too, and some of the other things that happened, because they directly relate to my near-death experiences. But one of the things that I did in my denial is I went down the most logical path in life I could. And I became project manager, and I became an IT person, and I did all the things that you're supposed to do to be successful, and had those golden handcuffs and was miserable, and knew that if I continued doing what I was doing, within a year, I was going to be dead, and walked away from it all.
Wow. Wow. So I can so relate to that, because I feel like that's quite a bit of my story as well, because I was in the IT profession, and really, when I think about it, the reason I chose it was because it was very lucrative, and I knew I would be set. But eventually it got to a point when I realized who I was, it just didn't fit anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I still am very logical. So I speak business and I speak woo-woo, which is what led me to the next iteration of my life, or present, is that I do coaching for people. And it's everything from business to ethereal, spiritual things that are happening in their lives, because we're just all experiencing this together. And we have universal concerns: being safe, being loved, loving others, and how we show up in our work, how we show up with each other. I think, though, backtracking of my history going into the NDEs, I remember from the time I was a baby, literally in the crib, I would have dreams every night of being murdered. And it was just like a broken record, a tape I would watch over and over every night. My mom said that I would cover my whole head with blankets as soon as I could grab them, and I'd leave a little space so I could breathe. But I always had to have the back of my head covered in blankets. And that was because I was shot at the nape of my neck. And I remember doing that as a baby. I remember that, though it wasn't scary, I just always had the memory. And it happened every night. As I got older, into my teens, it was less often, maybe weekly, more sporadic. As I got married, we ended up moving to California, and it was maybe monthly that I would have it. And as soon as I had it, I'll back up, as I had this dream, being shot in the back of the head, I would feel this heat and blackness, heat and red go from the head down to my feet, and then blackness and cold come back up, and then nothingness. And as I got older, my body started reacting as if I had been shot, and I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. As a child, it didn't mean anything. As I got older, it did. That's not my near-death experience, but it helps me understand we've lived lives before. We've had many. I remember many of them.
Right.
That's just the one that touched my life the most. I finally had a psychic that worked for me tell me that I was having the dreams because I hadn't forgiven the person who murdered me. On the other side, I was supposed to. But I was so angry at this person because he murdered me in front of my daughter that I came back to seek revenge. I just popped back in. I literally took somebody else's spot and came back in and just said, mine. Yeah. And that he actually still was alive and that he lived in California. I was not that far from him. I was not meant to see him. And if I didn't forgive him, if I didn't immediately forgive him, the next time that I had the dream, I was going to be dead. I wouldn't come back out of it. Now, this woman knew nothing about the dream. I never told her anything. So I went back home and did this strange, I'm mad, I'm really mad. I tried to get myself mad, so I could forgive him, and I couldn't. And then all at once, this floodgate of emotion came. And I turned into a sailor and was just screaming and angry and crying. And how could you? How could you do that in front of my daughter? That wasn't the agreement. I remember saying that wasn't the agreement. I had agreed to be murdered by him. And I think that's important for people to hear as we have horrible things happen in our lives. I had agreed for him to do that before I got here. I loved him enough that he needed to experience what this experience was like. And I stepped up and said, I'll do that. But I didn't agree to do it in front of my daughter. And in the end, I ended up as a lump on the log I was just this on the floor, a sobbing mess. But I forgave him. As I remembered all of that, I forgave him. And I never had the dream again. Years later, our co-host on Third Eye Salon, Kat, did a regression with me, a healing session with me. And I got the rest of the story. And the rest of that story came through as I saw him with blood on his hands after the incident and the horror he felt. I thought I had forgiven him before, but when I felt his horror, that then and only then could I truly forgive him. And I asked him, but why in front of my daughter? And he said, because that's my agreement with her. And I still get chills.
Yeah, when you mentioned that, that was the first thing I thought of. Why in front of my daughter is because on some level she had something to learn from that experience as well, right? She had a
Yes.
an avenue to expand as well because she had the opportunity to observe the two of you, right? She got to see
Right.
both sides of that event. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And it also made me very aware that we do have these ethereal families that we return here with, that we share these experiences with, and that we do step up and say, "Yeah, that sounds like a tough assignment, but I love you. I will do that." If you want to learn about hate or anger or mental illness or grief or forgiveness or whatever that is, I love you enough. I'll step in and assist you in that.
Right. That's a huge thing because it gives you the rationale to let people off the hook because you're all playing roles, the roles that we all need to play to help us come into greater awareness of self.
Mhm.
Now, I don't think I've ever heard you tell this story before.
No, so
Like this is
I totally bypassed the dream that I had. I mean, I could give you a very quick, that I would get on a bus,
yeah.
and it was early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, from the clothing. And it was a public bus, and I would get on the same seat every time, catty corner to the bus driver. I'd sit next to the window. My daughter would sit to the left of me, front seat. A couple of stops later, this man would get on. I could probably pull him out of an ID chart to this day. He would get on, and had a flannel shirt, blue jeans, and what I would consider that Seattle grunge that we used to have, really prevalent. But that was so out of place. Like that was not what you saw. This was early 60s. So, and he had a knapsack, which I believe was a army sack with him. And he sat in the seat behind us, and I felt very uncomfortable. And he immediately started playing with my hair. And to this day, if anyone plays with my hair, starts twisting it, I just go nuts. I cannot stand that. It just sends this whole body shiver down me because it was so terrifying at that point. That scared me more than anything, him playing with my hair. And I realized it was getting dusk and that where we were going to get dropped off was dark and there was no one around. And so I decided to gather my daughter and quietly try to get her off a stop early because there was at least lights there and probably people, and we wouldn't be alone. And she was kind of, but that's not our stop. It's like, shh, just go with me, just be quiet and sit back. And just before the stop, I felt this round, cold thing at the nape of my neck. And I remember just freezing, going, "What's that? What's that?" And on the third, "What's that?" I hear this bang ring out. And that's red hot shot from my neck to the top of my head. And then back down through my body, and then just as fast, this cold blackness, and then nothing. And that's the dream I would have every night as a kid.
Hey, so this is like a great setup for all of the things that you ultimately walk into this life, because there's a theme of death and
Mhm.
understanding death and the roles that we come to play. So this is not even your NDE. You walk into
This
a
isn't, yeah,
whole
this is not even my NDE.
you walk into a whole different experience.
Pre-NDE. Yeah.
Yeah, it sets the stage. It kind of helps understand the rationale for choosing this design, because we all come in here having designed the life experience, right? So we can come into greater understanding, but this kind of sets the stage for that, right?
Yeah, it does. And
Yeah.
I think part of that was I've always had this knowing where we come from somewhere else, and this repeats over and over again. And I remember having, those college talks when you knew everything, right? We were talking about, you know, philosophy and life and death and what happens. And I remember just like, guys, so simple, guys, so simple. And I'm trying to think of an analogy. It's like, think of this lake that we're all come from, and that from this lake, we evaporate up into, we choose to come here, we evaporate from the lake, come down as rain. We learn what we want to learn, we do what we need to do, and then we evaporate back and go back into the lake eventually. We're just these drops that repeat this cycle. And when we go back, we're not only adding that information for ourselves, but for the collective, for everyone. Everyone experiences and learns from what everyone else does.
Right. That's a great analogy, because we individuate as aspects, come into human form, and then we go back, but our experience permeates the lake. It becomes a part of the lake, and then somebody else gains experience from that as well. Gains
Mhm.
experience and knowledge and learning and all of those things, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And as we, as that information expands, the id that is all of us is expanding, continually becoming more self-aware and expanding in and of itself, because we are all part of that. It's this fractal growing.
So from here, how did your NDE come into play? How did you
Sure.
walk into that experience?
So going back to my IT days in tech and deciding if I stayed, I was going to die, whether that was a heart attack because I was heavier than I've ever been, I was not that healthy, or I was going to pull out in front of a car. I just knew if I stayed, it was over. And so everything in my being said to do something else. I asked for guidance, and which was odd for me because I still had not really, even though I had this whole, this is a weird thing I think about and I evaluate about myself. I had this knowing, right, that I was here before. I had the knowing I had a childhood friend that was a ghost, all of these things, but denial can be so strong that even energy work was weird to me. Like I was so detached from my source that that was somebody else. That was something else. That was another time. That was not me. To survive here in this lifetime, I had to fit in. That was the lesson I got.
Wow. So you had no connectedness to the spiritual aspects of you, no connectedness to your guidance, none of that. None of
Nothing.
that was coming through. It's like radio silence. None of that.
Radio silence. I had cut it
Yeah.
off at school. Um, and as I was working in the IT world, it started coming back. And that was part of the problem of me staying there. I started having auditory hits. I heard a coworker one time thinking about a problem. And I have to admit, I didn't like him. He was an a-hole. he was just a jerk to everybody. And we were back to back, so I couldn't see him. And he kept asking the same question over and over again. And I was just waiting for someone else in our team to answer him. So I did not want to. I was being really petty. I did not want to help him. We have our moments. And finally, I just turned around to him. And it's like, the answer is blah, blah, blah. Couldn't anyone else have helped him? And everybody just looked at me like I was crazy. And he just went white as a ghost and stared at me in absolute terror. And I said, what? Just angry. Now I'm angry. Everybody's looking at me weird. What? And one of the coworkers said, he didn't ask anything. And this person said, no, but I've been thinking about it for the last 10 minutes. And from that point on, I was really ostracized. People were very freaked out about working with me. And I was going through a lot of difficulties at home. So I felt very ostracized everywhere in my life. That was, and now this weirdness is coming in, really? It's like, mom was right. Mom was right. Don't let people know because they're going to think you're strange. I will say I did have a little fun with it, though. That not the nicest of my times, but I did know that he was probably having an affair. That's what was coming through all the time, that he was. So every once in a while, I would just come up to him and say, that was a really long lunch. I'm sure your wife would know. And he'd just have this look of,
Oh my God,
I
she
know what you
knows.
did this
Right.
weekend.
Right.
I had no idea what he did that weekend, but the guilt on his face said I nailed it every time.
Wow. Wow.
Petty. We all have our moments, but can be fun.
Yeah.
Payback was brutal. I'm sure I'll have a rewind on that one later on, but um, but I left that business following these clues for a business I had no business doing, but was led to do. And, I was literally had offers for this franchise sent to me at work right after I asked for a sign of what I'm supposed to do. And on the third one, I called them up and said, how did you get my name? Please take me off your list. I can get fired if they think that I am looking at something else. It's in my contract. Like, please stop. And she spent 45 minutes trying to find my name in their database and couldn't find me. And it was like, fine. If that's what I'm supposed to do, fine. And it was an absolute disaster financially. It was the most financially devastating thing I've ever done. And that was one of the lessons. It's like, just because you follow that guidance doesn't mean it's going to turn out the way you think it will or the way you want it to. Right. And that was a hard lesson for me. And it's a lesson I think a lot of people don't get. Like, well, I'm following the spiritual path. It should be easy. I'm doing God's work. I'm doing this. I'm right. Why is my life falling apart?
I think it speaks to resonance, right? Because it's not necessarily the highest path, it's just the resonant path of the moment. So surrendering to that. But even in the surrendering to that resonant path, whatever it is, regardless of if you perceive it as bad or good, it's lending itself to your evolution still.
It
Right?
absolutely did. And
Yeah.
I can look back and hear myself say, whatever this is that you're going to find, I'll do it and I'll learn what I need to learn. I'll do it. Whatever that is that I'm supposed to learn by doing this, I'm in. Because this isn't working. This isn't working. And anything's got to be better than this. famous last thoughts. And then I thought, but will you replace my income in X amount of time? Right? The bargaining starts then. So that fear first popped up, that fear of insecurity, of financial, of judgment, all those things came up instantly. Just let me not look stupid and have me replace my income, right? Let it be safe.
Did this happen before the NDE experience, or was this
Yes.
after the NDE? It's like you're still
Mhm.
preparing for the NDE. Yeah, gotcha.
So with the NDE was actually right in that period of time of that transformation. As my business was failing, my marriage was failing, my life was just pummeling into everything that I feared most. And I would go and sit in the graveyard between my home and my business and cry on my way there every morning, because who's going to question a woman sitting in a graveyard crying? It was the safest place to fall apart ever. Highly recommend it. No one will ask you if you're okay. Right? So I just didn't want to be here anymore. And I got to that point where I was done. I wasn't going to kill myself, but it was like, I know I signed up for this. I don't want it anymore. I don't want any of it anymore. And I think there's this part of me that knew, well, I just go back. I can just go back. And so for about 6 weeks, I had a period of time where my heart would stop working. In the middle of the night, my heart would just stop. And it would feel like, if you can picture all of the cords of energy going into your home suddenly being yanked out, and you had no energy going into your home at all. That's what it felt like. Just, and I have been able to feel my heartbeat since I was a child. So I was always aware of my heart beating. My heart wasn't beating. I wasn't breathing, but I was conscious. And I was just in blackness. And the first time it happened, it was very quick. And my first thought was, when I checking in with my heart, because it was this jolt of, wait, something's wrong, right? Something's wrong. There's this jolt, and my heart's not working. I don't feel my heart. Well, that's not good. And I started to think, well, that's not good. That was an interesting response, and instantly I felt like I got hit with a cattle prod or electric fence. The closest thing I can think of is, as a kid, I was climbing under an electric fence and I had metal curlers in my hair, and I stepped in a puddle and my curlers hit the electric fence and I was thrown about 10 feet from the jolt. That's what it felt like. And that continued to happen every 3 or 4 days. And each time it would go longer, to the point where I started finding myself, I called it the waiting room. It was blacker than any black you can imagine.
Yeah.
Absolutely void of all light. And yet there was energy everywhere. It was like pure potential. It was just, you could feel it. I could almost see it. And I was sitting there, and that analytical brain kicks in, or it did for me. And so it's like, well, is my physical body here? No, I'm conscious. My physical body must still be there. Am I part of all of this? Well, not quite. Not quite part of all of this. I could be part of all of this. Yeah, I could be part of all of this. I just need to fade in a little more. And I could go a little further, and I could be part of everything. And I remember having that feeling of, it feels so good. And I was just surrounded by this love that is beyond all words. And I knew that if I decided to go just that step further, then what I felt was beyond all words wouldn't even compare to what I felt afterwards. The love was that great. And then I'd start thinking about my husband waking up to me dead beside him and my parents having to bury me. And I go, I can't do it to him. And then as soon as I'd say I can't do it, the cattle prod would hit and I'd get that jolt. And I went for at least 3 weeks of having that. And I didn't tell my husband for a while that it was happening. Again, that denial, a very protective of, took me a long time to talk about these things, very protective of it all. And I didn't even tell him what was happening until one time when he confronted me, because when it would happen, I would sit up and do that gasp, this horrible influx of air, and scare the crap out of him. And he wasn't getting any sleep.
Yeah.
And so, he talked me into going to the doctor, which I had an appointment for. And I totally spaced telling the doctor. And the doctor did this walking out the door, and was it Columbo that used to turn around and say, wait a minute, I'm showing my age, but he'd turn around and he goes, I feel like there's something you're not telling me. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, my heart keeps stopping, but it always starts again. He's like, what? Turns around and closes the door and has me explain everything. We did every test under the book. We tested me for, I can't think of what it's called, but it's an epileptic type thing where you freeze at night. There's a couple different things. They tested me for epilepsy. They tested me for that. We did sleep studies. We did sleep apnea. I'd already been treated for sleep apnea. Didn't have sleep apnea because I'd had the surgery. Wasn't that. He knocked everything out. And he finally sat down with me a month or two later, whenever it was. And he said, I believe that your heart is stopping, but I don't know why. And I don't know any other tests to show me. And I don't know what to do. And he looked sort of bewildered, and he walked away, and he left my chart sitting there. And he had been scribbling on the chart inside on a note. And I opened it up, and he had out-of-body experience with question marks all the way around it.
Wow.
And that's all he had. And he had walked away. And I finally left because he wasn't coming back into the office. And a woman actually then entered my life. An angel entered my life at that time. Within a week of that, I was at it wasn't even a holistic fair, it was a health fair, that I was helping someone at her booth. And this little short woman walked up and literally came to my chest. She looked straight ahead and looked at my chest. And she got like a foot away from me and was just staring at my chest. I was like, excuse me. Can I help you? And she didn't say a word. And she stepped again forward. I stepped back. And finally, she looks up at me and she goes, want to know why your heart keeps stopping? And at that point, it almost stopped again out of shock. I said, yes. And, and she said, because you don't want to be here anymore. And you have the ability not to. And you're toying with it. And you need to decide if you want to be here, because next time you're going to decide to stay on the other side, not here. So you need to make up a decision whether or not you can't play anymore. I was so shocked. And then she added, by the way, next time is tonight. So if you want help, I'll meet you after you're done.
Wow. Okay. So one point I want to make is just how powerful we are, and we don't realize how powerful we are, how powerful our words are, how
Mhm.
powerful our intentions are, how powerful our belief is. Like, we're more powerful than we know, and we are creating all of it. It's not, life is not happening to us. We are manufacturing it as we go based on how we feel and how we
Mhm.
perceive and how we believe. So that speaks to all of that. But it's also telling that she was able to pick up on all of that you were experiencing. And that's another power that we have, is the ability to intuit, the ability to
Mhm.
see beyond the physical senses. So she was working with all of that. So yeah,
She was.
yeah.
And I met her at her apartment. Everything was in boxes. She says, yes, I was just leaving. And you just caught me. And she pulled out a table and a massage table. And I don't even remember laying my head on the table. I remember starting to. And that was the last thing I remembered for 2 or 3 hours. And when I came through, before she even worked on me, though, she made me I was probably there for about 4.5 hours. She made me talk through whether or not I wanted to be here until I made the decision. And I had to not just convince her, but convince myself that I wanted to be here. Um, because she wouldn't work on me until I made that decision. And so once she did whatever she did. And when I came out of it, she said, okay, you're fine now. You shouldn't have problems anymore. Oh, and I took out that dagger that was behind your shoulder blade, the one that keeps my rib will pop out. And I'd always had pain there, and I didn't realize I always had pain. But she's like, yeah, that was an old war wound. That's not what killed you. The lance that went through your gallbladder, that's what killed you. Went through your kidneys and she's explaining the angle that it went, and she goes, that's the one that killed you. But the other one was still, that one bothered you. And, I later had my gallbladder removed, and the pain was instantly gone that I lived with for all my life, I think. I don't know. I didn't even know that there was such a thing as no pain there until she'd taken that out.
This is what I wanted to ask. Why why did you decide to stay? Do you remember why you decided to stay? What was your rationale for making the decision to stay?
What I remember ultimately was I was giving up an opportunity that I was blessed enough to have to come here. And that no matter how bad things get, that this is temporary. This too shall pass. This life too shall pass. All the good shall pass. All the bad shall pass. Everything is in transition. And if I go, I don't know what I'm giving up. I don't know what that next thing is in my life here that I can do or be or see or learn, and giving that up. And that was the ultimate reason. I had to do it for myself, not for my husband, not for my parents.
Right.
I had to
Right.
decide that that's what I wanted. And it
Yeah.
was just the curiosity.
Nice. And I want to ask this because at this point you had no insight into purpose, like like
Then
mission and purpose and all of those
I thought
things. And
I'd screwed up my life so badly
mhm,
that, I couldn't go back to IT. Technology moved so fast, I was already out of cycle.
mhm,
Um, I knew that I couldn't continue in my business. It was failing. There was nothing I could do about it. I opened it right after 9/11, and people just weren't doing those types of businesses. They weren't pampering themselves. They were scared. and I had no idea. I had no idea what I was going to do. My
Yeah.
life was still falling apart. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet there was this peace that was starting to come over me.
Hmm.
And as we went through, and I mean, my business ended up taking me and my husband into bankruptcy. The one thing I was terrified more than anything, because only losers file bankruptcy in my head. You know, what are people going to say? What are people going to think? I'm a total failure in every way. You know, my life is over. That was what I lived before. And then it was like, well, you know, I guess it's temporary. We're going to see what happens.
Yeah.
And as I stood in the bankruptcy court, the whole cycle of why I went there, why I did what I did, why I had to go through what I went through came into full clarity. You know, I was standing there having given up our home, given up everything that we had of value, having my husband not knowing whether he was even going to be around afterwards. So basically, standing there naked before the world. There's nothing that I can count on to say I'm of value. Not my job, not my home, not my bank account, not my car, nothing, not my family. It's just me. And I remembered at that moment hearing a friend of mine from years earlier in the IT world, as we're hiking, she turned around to me and said, Lynda, when are you going to get that you're enough just because you were born? When are you going to get that? It's not the next raise. It's not the next promotion. You're enough. And I finally got it. Everything had been taken away from me. And I was still there. And I was still alive. And I was still breathing. I still had value. I was still enough.
I just want to say that this is like those of us who are awakening, because there are multiple ways to have this quote unquote death experience, right? And I feel like when you spoke about not knowing what's next, I think that's the critical piece. I don't think necessarily that we come intending to fulfill a purpose. We come, that purpose could be, you could perceive it in this way, that it's just to discover what we might become or what we might have the opportunity to create, right?
Mhm.
Because when I left my job, I had that same experience of standing in darkness, not knowing what's next, but
Right.
saying, well, we'll figure it out. I trust that we will figure it out. I'll intuit or I'll feel the next steps, and I'll just go step by step rather than needing to see the full picture explained before I make a move, or before I make a decision. We'll just see where it goes. So I'm going to have a curiosity to explore and allow myself to walk into the discovery of what it is ultimately to be me, right?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Right.
honoring that I am enough. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
And in that process, even though I saw everything materially dissipate around me, what grew during that time was my intuition, my psychic abilities, my medical intuitive that came through, still coming through, still trying to figure out what that is for me, how that happens. Um, I had one woman that I did body wraps on people, and I picked up her foot, and there was this little, like a grain of rice at the tip of her toe. And psychically, every single part of my being went red alert, like a submarine siren, red alert. And I knew that if I wrapped her, I would kill her. Like it was just, there was no question about it. There was something that wrong in it. And that was the indicator. And I had already wrapped her daughter. And I said, this is going to sound so crazy. It sounds crazy to me, believe me. But I need to unwrap your daughter. I am not going to wrap you. And I need her to drive you to a doctor. Because whatever this is that I'm seeing right here, every part of me is saying red alert. And if I'm wrong, I will pay for your doctor's appointment. But you need to go see somebody right now. Like, leave here and go. And I didn't hear from her or her daughter for days. And I thought, oh my God, what have I done? You know? And at least they haven't sent me a bill. Her her mom ended up, they didn't call me because her mom was rushed immediately into having a heart surgery, because what I saw was plaque that had broken off and left her veins and was sitting at the tip of her toe. And they said it wouldn't have even mattered if I had wrapped her. If she had not gone to see them that day, she wouldn't have woken up the next morning. So I sat there and thought, okay, you know what? At that moment, it doesn't matter what happens in my business. It doesn't, nothing matters. If that was the purpose for me to go through all of this, then it was worth it. And I thought that was my purpose. And then I had another client that was just this beautiful, beautiful young woman. And I don't know why I chose one day to share with her how I was anorexic in college and how that affected me from that point forward, and the lengths I had gone to try to lose weight, and that I'd gotten down to 95 pounds, and the desperation I had to get thinner than that, until literally a booming voice said, Lynda, you're sick. And I asked this booming voice, what do I do? And eat something. It was the worst possible thing I could be told. But it broke the cycle. And so I'm telling her this story as I'm doing these body wraps on her. She sent me a card, dropped it off later that day, and said that how did I know to share that story? She was contemplating using hard drugs, using coke, using whatever she needed to lose more weight. And I stopped her.
Wow. That speaks to the value of sharing your stories. And that's such a beautiful story. But sharing your stories, or sharing our stories, it's like a key that
It is.
unlocks, it's like a key that unlocks the heart. And so that
Mhm.
person can then connect with the truth of what you're saying beyond your story, right? Because it's really not
Yeah.
about the story itself. The story is just the key to
Mhm.
reveal the deeper truth that you need to be made aware of. You need to come
Right.
into awareness of, right? Yeah.
I mean, it's just like when I finally had the nerve to tell people I had a bankruptcy, and they're like, oh, if I'd known that's what you're going through, I would have told you to do it a long time earlier. You know, it was, get it over with. I did it. It's fine. You'll be fine. Like,
Yeah.
3/4 of the people I knew had filed bankruptcy and I never knew. But there was so much shame
Yeah.
that I wasn't willing to be exposed to them and be vulnerable with them and let them know what was going on. I think
Mhm.
that's a lesson too.
Yeah, being vulnerable and then not judging yourself, like
Yeah.
losing the self-judgment. I think that's what hinders us a lot. That's what brings about the guilt and the shame, is
Hmm.
the judgment of self. So losing
Yeah.
that to the degree that you can.
Yeah, I had all of those things happen, and I had another client that out of the blue gifted me $5,000 on her first visit. Just
Wow.
And I needed that much to pay my rent and pay my employees and the house payment, and I didn't know where it was going to come from. And literally just collapsed in my office and just said, I need help. I need you to help me do this. I can't do it. And later that day, she gave me this check out of the blue. So I think that whole purpose was not only for me to realize that I was enough and I wasn't all of those things, but it helped give me more understanding and reconnect me with some of my abilities that I had shut off over time.
I think that introspection is what catalyzes that ability to walk into those innate abilities that you have, because you turn inward, right? You have
Right.
to, because nothing left in the external world. You have to go
You
inward,
have to
and
go
that sparks remembrance of what you already know is there.
and
Yeah,
trust, like you said,
yeah,
the trust, and that negotiation that you take, that's just a vocalization of your fears. And I'll tell you what, you do that, you're gonna have a checklist. I remember when I said, please just don't let me go bankrupt. It was like, looks like that's another one to add to the list, you know.
It's-
I knew the second I said it, it was like, I knew that that was the next thing
yeah.
because it was like, I had all these opportunities to learn to face my fears, and I didn't. I just resisted and resisted and resisted until I had nothing left.
So at this point, you're back into reconnecting with yourself and operating within your intuitive abilities,
Yeah,
or
I'm
moving in that direction.
moving in that direction. I don't know, you know, I'm still in this half logic, half, yeah, I still walk that. Half of me's logical, half of me's intuitive. I work in both those worlds, and I kept thinking I had to choose, and I couldn't figure out how to maneuver in life because you were either woo woo or you were not. That was like my reality.
Yeah.
I didn't really want to be woo woo. And so I went back into the business world and did all these horrible self-flogging jobs, of taking whatever I could. But each of them gave me new skills that eventually allowed me to do what I do now, in working with businesses and
Yeah.
working with mindset and working with, looking at someone's business and being able to kind of see things from a different point of view for someone and be able to bring something forward where maybe their values are not showing up in their business. That's generally what happens. That
Yeah.
there's this conflict that's happening. Um, and but all of those jobs that I took helped me with skills that I needed. And eventually I just got to the point where I needed additional income streams, and again sat at my computer and said, all right, things are getting tight. We've got more expenses coming up. I'm game. Show me what to do.
Mhm.
And um, something came up on, I don't know, Craigslist or something for a merchant service rep, credit card processing, business, boring. Absolutely, I wouldn't recommend it for anyone. But it gave me another step into the right direction. And what I learned through this is you're not going to get to the end point on your first step. It's like throwing pebbles. You're throwing throwing your own breadcrumbs that you're following. You get to that next breadcrumb and there's a party that's throwing another one forward. And maybe, you've got choices you can go, and eventually you're going to get to the right place. But you aren't going to see that next step till you take the first one. And trusting that and stepping forward is part of it. Right or wrong doesn't really matter.
It does
It's taking
not.
the step.
That's a whole word that you just said. Absolutely. That's one of the sets of imagery my guides always give me, is being on a leading edge. So it's like a canvas. It isn't painted yet. You're
Mhm.
establishing that as you go, as you are willing to take a step, do you see an opportunity for the next step and the next step? But it's not going to come if you sit and waiting for the full picture to reveal itself. It doesn't work that way, right?
Doesn't.
Yeah, it does not
Doesn't.
at all. The other thing that you mentioned that I wanted to highlight was that we have this perception that you have to be one or the other. Like in this dualistic, this duality reality that we live in, you're either woo-woo or you're logical. But there's opportunity, and I think the call of the moment is marrying the two and
Yes.
understanding that you can operate in a state of wholeness. That's what oneness is. That's what the
Yes.
oneness is. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I really would love in this lifetime to see is the melding of those being so normalized that there isn't a woo-woo and there isn't a, it's just that that's who we are. We're all of that. And we celebrate all those gifts. And it's like any muscle. If you work only your arms are going to be a lot stronger. You're going to have little peg legs, right? All those bodybuilders that have little peg legs, right? Because they're only working their arms. You got to work everything and build those muscles up. And so, I have people I know that are so far on the woo-woo side that logic does not play a part in their life at all. And they're constantly getting themselves in trouble because there is no logic. There's no rent, whatever, and you got to build that muscle to have both.
For me, it has all stemmed from that heart connection, because I was one who would say I've always been creative, and I worked in IT, but I never considered myself a student of logic or one who operated in logic. I treated code like a masterpiece, like an artistic
Right.
masterpiece. So it would work, but it would be a creative expression. That's how I created code ultimately. But I've realized the more that I surrender in that heart space, that the heart is calling for organization. So it's like the heart is leading my expression of logic, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yes.
It's blending itself all together. So my husband is kind of blown away at times because I'll say I'm organizing, which I have never done before historically. But now I'm getting to a space where I can organize myself, but I'm not organizing in his way. I'm organizing, or the standard way, if that makes sense. I'm organizing in a way that's guided by my heart so that I can operate within my established container of
Right.
logic, if that makes
Yes.
sense. Yeah.
Yes. And it shows up differently for everyone. Woo-woo shows
Yeah.
up differently for everyone. And some people it's just I get that gut feeling for, and that's as far as it goes. Get that gut feeling that I shouldn't turn left for this. I should take a different route home. And so when I look at my life, I look at almost with humor at how I've had all these abilities show up, and yet I was so resistant that I denied that they even happened. Yeah, and how they'd show up, they pop in and out of my life, but I would still deny. It's like, no, that's not it. And I think that's our society is better now. But, growing up, it was not acceptable for me to have that. And I think people may find themselves still in that. Hopefully, we're evolving enough that we're releasing that. But there was a lesser, you were lesser if that's how you carried yourself through life.
Yeah. I think that changes as we change individually, and that speaks to the motive of the ego is to maintain status quo, to keep the comfort zone a comfort zone, right?
Right.
To
Right.
resist all threats to the comfort zone at all
Right.
costs, right? But as you put that in check and move forward, as we do that individually? Does it happen collectively? And I think the shift we've seen over the last couple of years speaks to that. You know, more people coming out and more people being comfortable. And as we do it, it gives the next person the comfort and the confidence to do the same thing. So,
Right.
yeah.
And it's become much more mainstream. I mean, Richard Branson talks about it all the time.
Yeah.
He's completely says his success is because of his intuition
Mm.
and his abilities. So, you know,
Yeah.
we may call it different things, but as we start allowing both of those abilities to show up however they show up within us, you know, I hear you saying you're not logical, but once you get to the point of understanding the logic so much that you can be creative with it, that's where you
Mm-hmm.
were.
Yeah.
Like, that's where Einstein was, that it was like, that's where the creativity starts.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the beauty and the artwork from that evolves. That's where architects come in with these incredible designs,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's being able to maximize those abilities within ourselves and play. Like the
Yeah.
word I kept getting was play,
Yes.
play,
Yeah. Right.
explore, be curious, play.
Yeah. That childlike wonder. That's what you're
Yeah.
calling back up, right? That
Mm-hmm.
childlike wonder. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
So now you operating within your intuitive abilities, and your husband, is this around the time that he comes down and he's ill?
So my husband, we were married 37 years, and
Hmm.
2 weeks after we got married, he injured his back.
Okay.
So my husband had always been in pain, had always um, had a really tough life, horribly tough life from childhood on. It never was a good life. Um, and we had a whole series of lessons we had to learn together. Um, but he got to the point where years ago, the same doctor that I had told him if he didn't start gaining weight, didn't start eating, didn't start doing things to help himself, his body was going to eat itself and he would be dead within 5 years. That was 15 years ago, that happened. And yet he survived in this painful state. And he was very frustrated. He was frustrated because he knew my story of how I could check out, and he wanted that, but he couldn't check out, and for whatever reason, his body would not give in, would not give up. And so we moved to Oregon so that we could actually, he said, I'm not afraid of death. I'm afraid of dying. Um, and so we made the decision to move to Oregon, partly because it was one of the few states that had death with dignity. And so we moved here over the course of 5 years or so, 6 years. His health got worse and worse. And they could never diagnose him, though, with anything. And so in the end, he didn't qualify. He couldn't take advantage of it. And he ended up dying with hospice. And that was, it was hard watching this man just disappear before me, and we'd had a rocky marriage, most of our marriage. So I had all of those feelings of guilt as well, that, I could have done better. I should have done better. All of those things. Why couldn't we have done better? And in the end, I think it was not till the last month of his life that we found peace together. And I think that's what allowed him to go. And yeah, So
Wow.
all that time of him waiting was for us to find that peace, I think.
Wow. Did you ever, okay, sometimes as a wife, you want to be helpful to your husband or to even your kids, but knowing operating from the perspective that I operate from now, I realize that everybody is sovereign and experiencing life in the way that they need to experience life to have the experiences that they desire to experience. Did you ever, like the lady you encountered who was able to see you and say, you want to check out, you need to make a decision, we need to do these things. Did you ever try to take that route with your husband?
We talked about it.
Yeah,
Yeah, we did talk about it. And that's when his frustration would come in.
yeah.
And it's like, I don't want to be here. No, I don't have a reason. No, I don't want this life anymore. I didn't want this life at 12. I don't want this life now. Yeah. And he was angry
Mm.
that he couldn't just have his heart stop in his sleep like I had.
Were you able to see why, or were you able to see or intuit in a way that it would bring understanding from your own perspective? Because it has to be difficult as a wife, it would have to be difficult, I can imagine, to just sit
Mhm.
and have to watch that, not 24/7. You're sitting there watching it 24/7. So
Yeah,
how do you manage your own state of being within that experience?
it was difficult. It
Yeah.
was difficult. And there was a lot of resistance of, um, I would take 2 hours to go run errands because I just needed the space. And, he joked that I should have on my tombstone, I won't be long, I'll be right back, because that was what I would say, And 2 hours later, I'm finally showing up, but it was this resistance that I had where I wasn't to get my needs met of just having some solitude where I would just check out and um, wouldn't know what I had done for 2 hours. I would just be gone and be back, but for the most part, yeah, I was with him the whole time, trying to still work my business, trying to still coach people, trying to still create an income because I could see his life coming to an end and not knowing if I was at a point where I could sustain myself, having moved here and having to start over again. And so all of those pressures were there. And in the end, I remember there's a point where it was like, remember what's important. All of that stuff you will figure out. But remember what's important. And it was our connection. And that last month was was probably more beautiful than any time in our marriage, that we were able to, and all I did was sit next to him and be present, and that's all I could do because he was so far gone at that point, emotionally, physically. He had checked out in every other way than physically. There was a peace that came to us at a different level.
You said something that stuck out for me. It's something my guides say all the time. When they say things aren't as complicated as we have a tendency to make them out to be. And so
Mhm.
the two major lessons they've always given to me is detached observation, that's non-judgmental observation, and then full presence. That means
Mhm.
being in the moment. And you talked about just your ability to be present with him, not to
Right.
say anything, do anything, just your presence, just to
Yeah.
be fully present was enough
That was, yeah.
to allow the peace to come
Because every
about.
time I
Right.
tried to do something, it was never right. It was never good enough. It was never it was never what he needed.
Right.
So I was always trying instead of just being present, instead of
Right.
just being him.
Right. It's like though you want to fix like that thing
Right.
where
I
you
wanted
want
to fix
everybody to be
things.
comfortable, you want to fix things, but in the fixing lies a judgment that what I'm witnessing is not correct. It's not
Right.
right. It's not at peace. But there's a call for it. That's where the detached observation comes in, or compassionate detachment is another
Hmm.
way to state that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I went through that process, and that brings me into being I'm actually a death with dignity doula.
Yeah.
There's a death doula that will handle the whole process, and I've been approached many times to do that, to be in hospice. And I just tell people that I have so much respect for people who are in hospice that support people through the process, because it's hard. Um, and some people can have that presence all the time, and and their reservoirs are so full that they're able to, and they can regenerate themselves. And I realized I can't. That's not where my gift is. My gift is coming in and bringing that presence and that peace for people who do choose to use death with dignity. And it was interesting. I when I got here, um, several years before Chris passed, I met someone who helped pass the legislation here. He was instrumental, and he lived here in town. And I remember him having a discussion with him and saying, I don't know who's going to take my place when I go. And I remember looking at him going, I will. I'll step up. And at the time I'm going, what did you just say? What did you just commit to? Yeah. And it was like, okay, there's a deep calling in there somewhere, that I didn't hesitate and say, I will. And I've been given so many amazing gifts by being present with people since that time. I think I've had 18 patients since my husband passed a year ago in February. So almost one a month on average. Not all of them end up using the Death with Dignity. About half their underlying disease takes them. But I've been able to sit with families and remind them what's important. Like, you've been given this great gift. Most people don't know when someone's going to pass. You do. You've been given this time frame. During this time, remember what's important. Everything else you can figure out. Right? Um, don't let that get in the way of being present with each other.
So for someone who might be watching who may not be familiar with the term death doula, because it's a term I know now, but growing up in my household, I never heard the term, and would
Mm-hmm.
not have ever known that such a role even existed. So for someone who doesn't know what that is, explain a little bit about that process and how it works.
So it's interesting, a doula normally is known as someone who helps bring life in. So, like a midwife will help bring children into the world. And this is just the other bookend of that, and helping people near the end of life. And a full death doula will do everything from helping, and everyone's different. So every death doula is different and what they specialize in. Some of them will do everything from helping you make sure that your paperwork is in place, that your plans are in place, help you find the right care, help you do everything to satisfy your needs through your death, help support your family, help do ceremony with you. All those things can be part of what a death doula does. They can be simply, and I heard one that simply said, I have she teaches people how to be death doulas, and she has one that does nothing but teach people how to make recipes for people who can only have soft food. That's all she does. For people who are dying, who are on very restricted diets, so that they don't get bored, to help raise the quality of their life. I mean, so if it's something that you are curious about or looking for, everyone's unique. And it's something that is not licensed at this point. There are courses people can take and get certified in, but it's not licensed, at least in Oregon, and most states it's not licensed. So there's caution on that as well. But a lot of it is dealing with the spiritual side of it, and supporting the family through that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I imagine it's one of those types of roles that you feel a calling to do, to
Mhm.
operate within. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I never pictured myself doing what I'm doing. But I when Chris couldn't have it done, I saw the importance of it. And I remembered my commitment that I had made. And so I talked to the organization that we were going to use, and they were short of volunteers, so I volunteered. And, I hadn't even completely gotten through the training. My very first appointment with someone was when she passed. She came from a hospital. It was one of the most incredible experiences of presence, being present and being taught how to be present by someone. And it was incredible. We talked about it, and she's like, "Oh, share this. I don't care. I'd love, let people see a different side of me." She was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. It had affected all of her relationships. She had very, very few people in her life. I was warned before I went there that she could be incredibly out of control, angry, raging, and to be prepared for that. And I'm thinking, what did I get myself into? Oh my gosh. I'm going to help. How am I going to help this woman pass if she's screaming at me? Right? How does this work? Yeah. And all these judgments started coming in, and all these scenarios started going through my head. And I thought, at one point, it was just quiet, quiet. You don't know any of those things. All you know is what you've been told. Show up in love and in service. Everything else will happen as it should. And, I spent 2 hours with her on her last day when she had no one else. And I held her hand. And that woman who I was terrified to meet because she was so out of control, right, comforted me for half that time when she found out that my husband had just died. And we were just present with each other. And she thanked me for giving her the chance to be seen.
Now that is beautiful. And I think that's a big takeaway. If nobody picks up anything else,
Yeah.
the pricelessness of just presence.
Yeah.
Presence and
Without judgment.
that compassionate detachment. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to be there. And I held her hand as she passed. And that was my first appointment. And I helped actually mixed the concoction of medications that she
Mm-hmm.
drank.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I stepped in fully
Mm-hmm.
for the role on my first one.
So just imagine like extrapolating that out. If we approached life in general in that way,
Right.
full presence, compassionate detachment, just being, yeah. What for you is the biggest takeaway, what do I want to say, the headline for all of these experiences, if you could wrap it up in one nutshell?
Wow. I think for me, looking at my journey here, it's not over. I don't know where it will go, but for all of us, there's so many people who are afraid of death,
Mm-hmm.
afraid of the unknown, just the unknown. That's the biggest unknown, right? That's for people, just of the unknown. To have flexibility in your thoughts, have flexibility in your actions. When I see people who don't have that flexibility, who have either a belief system or a pattern that they are terrified to break, and they are unwilling and they fight it all the way, they're the ones that have the hardest time. And life is messy, and life is wonderful, and life is hard, and life can be full of joy and love, and we don't know how things can change tomorrow for any of us. But to have that presence will allow the flexibility, that wonderment, the curiosity, the love for yourself as well as for others, forgiveness for yourself along the way, forgiveness of others. I think that is where we grow the most in this life of just, it's not what you accumulate. That you can't, again, you can't take it with you. Half of us can't keep it when we're here, right? So it's not that. It's not the things. It's the lives that we touch. And we don't know, we don't always remember what we signed up for. And we're intertwined with people who have signed up for other things that may not seem to gel with ours, but in the end somehow do. And being able to still be present in this life, that's another part of it. I mean, that's a huge part of it, because it's really easy to just be so airy-fairy about that nothing here matters, but it does matter. What we do here matters a lot. How we treat each other matters. And I've seen families that didn't make amends, couldn't make amends for whatever reason, and the pain of that, but still be able to be present, to heal through that process, to step them through that gate. I've had clients who were in different religions, and sometimes that gave them great peace and sometimes it didn't. And that rigidity of doctrine was usually what kept them from having peace.
How has your understanding of death catalyzed your, I want to say, thirst for life or
Yeah.
joy and all of these things? How has that catalyzed that?
Not just my own experiences,
Mm-hmm.
but sitting with every single person who passes before me. It makes me be that much more present in my life. And I just live now by this too shall pass. Like, if things are going amazing, wonderful, this too shall pass. Be ready. If they're horrible and you just can't see your way out of it, this too shall pass. Hang on. It's coming. And what you do in between is what matters. How you live your life. That's, for me, it's how do I live my life? I'm much more now of service. I do things for my neighbors. I do my best to be of service for people without compromising being service to myself as well, which I had to learn. Like, that's another thing of just, there's this thing of, I was taught growing up, you just give and give and give till there's nothing left of you. And then maybe you've given enough, maybe, right? And that's not it. You've got to give to yourself as well. And loving yourself isn't just a concept, and taking care of yourself is an action item.
I would say loving yourself is first, because you can't
Mhm.
give what you are not. You can't
Right.
resonate on a level that you haven't yet established within yourself first. And they
Mhm.
say you can't feel anybody else's cup from an empty bucket, right? You can't feel
Right.
anybody else from an empty bucket. So you have to focus on
Mhm.
you first. And as you establish that within yourself, that resonance within yourself, is it then reflected within your outer world, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And that is, and also just like, I think I don't remember who said it, but the most powerful prayer you can say is thank you. And I go through my day just thanking things in my life. It probably, there's not a day that doesn't go by that I thank my house for being here. I I thank, the connections that I have. I thank, the neighbors that care for me, my friends that care for me. It's just, I thank myself sometimes because I didn't stub my toe on that same spot every morning. It's like, thank you. This morning I learned to step over half a foot and I didn't stub my toe today. Thank you. I mean, sometimes it gets silly, but I've learned that that is also how I become much more flexible in life and more present in life, is to just constantly take that time to say thank you throughout the day, and to thank people. I'm constantly not just, it's thanking people for their effect on your life. And for what, maybe it's not even for you, for what you saw them do for someone else. And recognizing the good in them. I think, recognizing that they're demonstrating love. And I think for me, that's my goal, is demonstrate love. Do I fail sometimes? Oh yeah. Of course, human.
Well, yeah, we all do from
I'll
time to
do. Do I
time.
get caught up in politics and in, troubles and this and that? Of course,
Mhm.
I'm sure we all, have our buttons that get pushed,
Mm,
that are just reflections on us to be able to choose how we want to show up and what we want to focus on.
yeah.
Um, and again, remembering we're just this tapestry of intertwined experiences.
Given what you know about death, how would you comfort someone or help someone see another perspective based on your own perspective of death? Because so many people have fear when it
Yeah.
comes to death, right? That's
Mhm.
such a fearful topic. So how would you demystify death for that person who's so fearful of death that they won't allow themselves to live?
Couple things. I think one is, there are a lot of theories of what happens after we leave here, is partially up to how we perceive what's going to happen. Heaven is built by us as well, in how we perceive it. Some people perceive these crystal buildings and other people don't. They see these grassy fields, and it's so we're creating everything, co-creating everything within us. And if we're fearful of our death, if we're fearful of that we haven't, it's usually because we have regrets that we haven't addressed here, or that we have, again, believed a doctrine that may or may not serve us. And I will always honor someone's religion when we talk, but I've had people ask me, how do I feel so safe, so secure in my knowing that they're going to be fine? And that's when I ask them if it's okay if I share what I was like for me in the waiting, I call it the waiting room, for me, what that experience was like. And that I believe everyone has their own experience there, but the ultimate thing is the love. Like that thing that I was in was pure potentiality. Where I went after that was partly my memories of what I've experienced before, my things that I've added to that belief system while I'm here. Who knows? But that love was what was important. And there was no judgment. That's one of the things that I really try to get through, is that the judgment you're experiencing is your judgment of yourself. And whether you judge yourself because you bought into how other people are judging you, have judged you in the past. But ultimately, you have to agree to that judgment for it to be real for you. Have you had, if you have things that you truly remorse, that you truly regret, try to address them in some way. In some way. Now, it may not be directly with that person. And I've had people soul to soul talk to that person, whoever that is, that you feel such grief and remorse over, that you feel you've wronged. Soul to soul, talk to that person. Tell that person how, whatever you need to, ask for forgiveness and forgive yourself. And because that's what that drudgery, that darkness, I think, can carry into an experience, yet just another experience, where people, talk about going to hell. I think hell is our self-judgment, our inability to love and forgive ourselves, and our inability to, or our, if we've wronged people, not making that attempt to make it right. And if someone's already passed and that's something, then still soul to soul, talk to that person. Talk to that person. And it may just be, I'm struggling still. I'm struggling with how you treated me. I'm struggling that you did this to me as a child. I hate you for that. I want you to know that, and somewhere along that way, finding that peace for yourself. Because when you move, I guess one of the other things that I've had, I have one person that I helped cross that was staunch atheist. And he was like, I don't believe anything's going to happen afterwards. And I said, okay. And he just looked at me. What aren't you telling me? I'm not going to question your belief system. You are, do me a favor. You are an amazing teacher. You've always been an amazing teacher. I know you have been an amazing teacher. And if you see something on the other side, will you let me know? Just let me know. And 5 minutes later, he was gone. And I was closing my eyes, and I was the only one in the room with him. And I opened my eyes, and across the whole room was like an interference in the air that was in the shape of two gigantic wings.
Wow.
And I just, thank you. It was just this mirage, an interference in the air that was just this huge, took up the whole space of the room.
That is beautiful. Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So my takeaway from all of what you just said is, in addition to the fact that we are creating all of it, we have an opportunity to liberate ourselves by getting out the regrets and all the feelings that we might have against someone, and that goes that goes beyond death situations. That speaks to any relationship, because not everybody is ready to be confronted, or not everybody is ready to confront
Right.
somebody they feel wronged by, but you can allow that energy to move through you by getting it out. So whether you speak to them soul to soul, or whether you write it down, because I do a lot of journaling, so you can even
Yes.
write them a letter, and when you're ready to send that letter, you envision yourself sending them that letter and them receiving that letter. But once you've sent that letter, it's kind of like you've released that, you've let that go from you. So
Yeah.
you get it out in whatever way works for you, right? But you're releasing that, allowing
Right.
it to move through you. Yeah.
And I think also, if we don't do it in this life, we have the chance on the other side. We go through, I truly believe we go through our life reviewing it and seeing how our actions affect the other person. There are times I'm terrified still to think, some of the thoughts that I had were not kind, and those thoughts carried energy. Those thoughts carried weight, and I think about that. It's like, yeah, I'll probably have to do some answering. I'll have to look at that. And I think I'll also be able to do it from a point of compassion that I may not have for myself now, or more so. And really see from that other person when I said an unkind word, when I ignored, when I was less than what I would hope to be. And I think that includes to myself.
I feel like on some level that gets transmuted if you make peace with that in the present. So some of that Frances Key speaks about within her book, the Team Series books, and it speaks about how you can change the past or set up the future from the present moment by changing your perspective of a thing. So it's basically like
Yes.
reframing events or reframing beliefs that have
Right.
happened, so you can transmute that energy. So all is not lost. I think, and from my perspective, that's what the way I perceive it. I don't feel like at this point we are bound to karma necessarily, but
Yeah.
as you are able to come into a greater awareness of it within the present moment, do you transmute those things that have happened in the past, so you don't have to feel tied to those or feel like I'm going to get back at some
Right.
point down the line, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's there's even moments where, I'll still have unkind thoughts, and it's like, now I catch them and it's like, wait, stop, rewind, back
Yeah.
up. I'm going to replace that with this instead.
Yeah. Right.
And the sooner I can do that, I've also realized I don't live in resentment. I don't live in regret.
Yeah.
I can be more present.
Yeah.
and I can have more ability to make decisions now and not live in the, well, I was a victim of this, I did that. I mean, I've had my share of victimhood in this life. We all have in some way or another. You know, I don't care to carry that forward. That's not who I am now. That helped create who I am. How I respond to that creates who I am. How I respond to losing everything creates who I am. You know, I've seen people who are still horribly upset because their business had to shut down in 2020. And their life was completely thrown up and disrupted. And they still live with that resentment because they're living then. They're still living then. They're still carrying that forward versus allowing themselves to release that and be present now.
Right.
And they're losing out on now because they're still living then. And my hope is to be now, live now.
Releasing the story.
Release that story, release how it has control over you. Because that's what you're allowing, is that story to have control over how you live your life now. And the same goes with people with illness. You know, I've had people who have fought an angry end to their last breath because they weren't ready to go and this illness took them. And they don't understand why. And I've had others that said, you know, probably because I kept smoking when I shouldn't have. Probably because, you know, who knows why. I got it. I've had people who've had cancer, never had cancer in their families. There's no reason they should have gotten it. Right. And they're like, but you know what? I've had more close time with my family over these last 2 years, and I've appreciated life more than I ever did my decades before. And so I don't know. I can't say how I would feel having that. I know how I would hope to live those lives, those steps, that day, every day.
Beautiful, beautiful. And is there anything else that you feel that hasn't been shared that you would like to highlight?
I really, it's take whatever you take from this.
Yeah.
And you can apply that to your home life. You can apply that to your work life. Apply that presence wherever you are. Find out where you're not in alignment. If there is an unsettledness within you, it means you're just not in alignment with your highest good, your values. Something's just not in alignment. And work with someone. I mean, that's probably 3/4 of what I do with my clients now. Where are you not in alignment? And how do you shift into alignment so that you can move through with more joy?
Grace and ease.
Grace and ease, exactly. In
My
fact,
two favorite words of the moment right now. Yeah.
I sell on eBay. I sell Native American jewelry, and I have on every box that I send out, I say, may you walk in beauty, grace, and joy.
Nice. Nice.
That's the blessing I send with each thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, this has been a beautiful conversation. I was so excited to speak with you because I know a little bit of your story. I didn't know about the very beginning, but I've kind of seen your story unfold at least as long as I have known you. And I was just fascinated because you have so many different perspectives of death and caretaking, and death in many different forms, the many different forms that it presents as, because it's not always physical death, but sometimes you witness people going through deaths of personalities, death of egos, all these different things. So I'm so happy that we had an opportunity to share this beautiful conversation. You're a beautiful soul doing beautiful things and supporting everybody where you can. You know, that just speaks to the heart of you. So yeah, this has been fantastic. So I have to thank you.
Thank you. And I did think of
Yeah.
one thing, death, whether it is an event, a personality, a
Yeah.
decision, or a body.
Yeah.
It's a transition. It's an event. It's just another event. And we can choose how we respond to those events. And even on the other side, I totally believe, I wasn't supposed to turn around and come back. I wasn't supposed to give a middle finger to everybody and say it. No, I'm going back down. So even there, we have some choice in how we respond. Was that the best thing I could have done? Probably not. I had to make peace down here and do the work I should have done in between.
Mhm.
Right? If you don't do
Yeah.
the work in between, you get to do it again and again until you get it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just events. It's events, and how you respond to those events makes all the difference.
Very well said. Very well said. Thank you guys for watching. This has been such a lovely conversation. Lynda's contact information will be down in the description below. And if you'd like to reach out to her, please feel free to do so. And we thank you for joining us. Be well, guys. Namaste. We are one, fractal of the original spark. And in this present age, do we still find us in many aspects, living behind a veil of forgetting, only to discover that we must make the choice to remember that we are whole and utterly complete by virtue of our very existence alone, with the presence of divine love as the core of the being we are, on earth as within the heavenly realms, with power, with grace, with the will to create our world as we desire, as we simply make the choice to know. But the present is not for the faint of heart. Staring into the face of life summons patience, openness, and a courageous humility, for we can only gain that which we endeavor to move toward. We can only reawaken to that which we choose to see through the eyes of truth. And yet, this stands as the challenge within this illusion, as belief therein draws to the forefront the flawed perception of separation, hindering access to knowing, keeping at bay the all's infinite potential. This is the assignment within this Earth School curriculum. So, our point of focus must be keen, heart and mind coherently aligned, for we will embody the purest essence of us only as we make the conscious choice to dive deep within the infinite waters of self-discovery, to explore and embrace through intention the glorious art of becoming through the subtle mastery of being.